After living alone for years, senior women develop a vision so sharp, so penetrating, that they can see through every game, every manipulation tactic, and every false promise a man might offer. They've lived through enough, experienced enough, and learned enough to recognize patterns that younger women often miss. What they see in men now isn't colored by desperation, loneliness, or the need for validation. It's crystal clear, brutally honest, and often surprising. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's earned through years of independence, self-discovery, and yes, sometimes painful lessons. But once a woman reaches this level of clarity, there's no going back to seeing men through rose-colored glasses. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will change how you understand relationships, independence, and the power that comes with truly knowing yourself. Welcome back to another video. If this is your first time here, this channel is dedicated to providing you with psychological insights, relationship wisdom, and the tools you need to navigate life with confidence and clarity. We focus on real issues that affect mature women, and we never sugarcoat the truth. Today's topic is particularly powerful because it addresses a transformation that happens to women who have spent significant time living independently. This isn't about bitterness or giving up on relationships. It's about evolution, wisdom, and the clarity that comes from truly knowing yourself. Before we dive deep into this topic, I want to ask you for a small favor. If you find value in this video, please take a moment to hit that like button. It helps this content reach more women who need to hear these truths. Also, drop a comment below, sharing your own experiences or thoughts on this topic. Your insights create a community of wisdom that benefits everyone who watches. Don't forget to share this video with other women in your life who might benefit from this message. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our content. For those who want to go the extra mile in supporting this channel and helping us continue creating content that empowers and educates, consider leaving a super thanks. Your support directly enables us to keep bringing you these important conversations. Now, let's dive into this fascinating topic. When a senior woman has lived alone long enough, something profound shifts in how she perceives men. This isn't about becoming jaded or cynical. It's about developing a clarity so sharp that it cuts through illusions, pretenses, and the games that once might have confused or charmed her. This transformation is psychological, emotional, and deeply rooted in experience. Let me walk you through exactly what happens and how these women see men differently than they once did. The foundation of independence. First, we need to understand what living alone truly means for a woman who has done it long enough. It's not simply about physical solitude. It's about building a life entirely on her own terms. She's learned to fix things herself, make decisions without consulting anyone, manage her finances independently, and create a home that reflects only her preferences and needs. She's navigated challenges, overcome obstacles, and proven to herself that she doesn't need anyone else to survive or thrive. This foundation of independence creates a psychological shift that's difficult to reverse. When a woman knows in her bones that she's capable of handling life alone, men stop being necessities and become options. This distinction is crucial. When someone is an option rather than a necessity, you evaluate them completely differently. You're no longer willing to overlook flaws, make excuses for bad behavior, or settle for less than you deserve because you're not operating from a place of need. Seeing through the performance. Senior women who have lived alone long enough develop an almost supernatural ability to see through the performance that many men put on during the early stages of interaction. They recognize charm as a tool rather than a quality. They distinguish between genuine interest and strategic attention. They spot inconsistencies between words and actions with remarkable precision. This ability comes from experience, but it's sharpened by independence. When you're not desperate for male attention or validation, you're much more clear-headed about what you're actually seeing. You notice when someone's stories don't quite add up. You recognize when compliments are generic rather than specific. You see when someone is love-bombing you rather than genuinely connecting with you. These women have lived through enough relationships, dated enough men, and had enough time to reflect on patterns to recognize manipulation tactics instantly. The man who comes on too strong too fast no longer sweeps them off their feet. Instead, they see the red flag waving brightly. The one who makes grand promises about the future immediately sets off alarm bells because they've learned that real commitment is shown through consistent actions over time, not through exciting words about tomorrow. The death of romanticization, living alone for an extended period, kills the tendency to romanticize men or relationships. Senior women who have spent years in their own company no longer view a relationship as the solution to anything. They're not looking for someone to complete them because they've discovered they're already whole. They're not seeking someone to give their life meaning because they've created meaning independently. This means they see men as actual human beings, rather than as fantasies, projects, or solutions to imagined problems. They recognize that every man comes with his own baggage, his own limitations, and his own issues. They don't expect perfection, but they also don't excuse dysfunction. They understand that a man is just a person, not a savior, not a status symbol, and not a guarantee of happiness. This clear-eyed view extends to the concept of romance itself. These women aren't impressed by grand gestures that aren't backed up by daily kindness. They value consistency over intensity. They recognize that real love is shown in small, steady actions rather than dramatic displays. They see through the difference between a man who brings flowers once and a man who remembers to pick up her favorite tea every week without being asked. Pattern recognition and prediction. One of the most powerful abilities that develops in senior women who have lived alone is pattern recognition. They've seen enough men, dated enough types, and experienced enough relationships to recognize patterns almost instantly. Within the first few conversations, they can often predict with startling accuracy how things will unfold. They recognize the pattern of the man who's all talk and no action. They spot the one who's still emotionally entangled. With an X, they identify the person who's looking for a mother rather than a partner. They see the one who wants all the benefits of a relationship without any of the commitment. They recognize the type who loves the chase but loses interest once he's won. This pattern recognition isn't cynicism, it's wisdom. It's the ability to see beyond the individual to the archetype he represents. And because these women have lived alone long enough to be comfortable without a relationship, they're not invested in ignoring these patterns or convincing themselves that this time will be different. They trust what they see, and they act accordingly. Standards that cannot be negotiated. Living alone teaches a woman exactly what her standards are because she's living them every day. She knows what kind of environment she needs to feel peaceful. She knows what kind of communication style works for her. She knows what behaviors she finds acceptable and which ones she doesn't. And because she's been living by these standards alone, she's not willing to lower them for anyone. Senior women who have spent years alone have non-negotiable standards that they've developed through experience and self-knowledge. They know they require honesty because they've experienced the damage that lies cause. They insist on respect because they've felt the erosion that disrespect creates. They demand consistency because they've been hurt by unpredictability. They expect emotional availability because they've wasted time on emotionally unavailable men in the past. These standards aren't arbitrary or unreasonable. They're based on deep self-knowledge and clear understanding of what creates a healthy relationship. And because these women are genuinely fine living alone, they're willing to stay alone rather than compromise on these standards. They see clearly that a bad relationship is worse than no relationship at all. The illusion of neediness. Men often operate on the assumption that women need them. This assumption shapes how they approach relationships, how they behave within them, and how they expect women to respond to them. Senior women who have lived alone long enough shatter this illusion completely. They see through any attempt to create artificial dependence or to position themselves as necessary. These women recognize when a man is trying to create situations where she'll need him. They see through the offer to handle things for her that she's perfectly capable of handling herself. They understand when someone is trying to position himself as indispensable, and they respond to these tactics not with gratitude but with clear-eyed recognition of the manipulation at play. This clarity allows them to see men's behavior differently. When a man pulls away thinking she'll chase, she doesn't. She lets him go because she doesn't need him enough to play games. When a man withholds attention thinking she'll work harder to earn it, she doesn't. She moves on because she values her peace more than his approval. When a man creates drama thinking she'll fight for the relationship, she doesn't. She walks away because she's learned that real love doesn't require fighting, proving, or performing. Emotional autonomy and its power. Living alone for an extended period creates emotional autonomy that fundamentally changes how senior women see men. They're no longer looking to men to regulate their emotions, validate their worth, or provide their happiness. They've learned to do all of this for themselves. This emotional independence gives them a clarity about relationships that's impossible to achieve when you're emotionally dependent on male attention or approval. These women see clearly that a man's mood is his own responsibility, not theirs to manage. They recognize that his insecurities are his to work through, not hers to constantly soothe. They understand that his need for validation isn't her job to fulfill endlessly. They see that his emotional unavailability isn't a challenge for her to overcome, but a reality for her to accept or reject. This emotional autonomy also means they're not thrown off balance by male behavior that would have devastated them when they were younger. If a man doesn't call when he says he will, they're disappointed but not destroyed. If a man loses interest, they're hurt but not shattered. If a relationship ends, they grieve but don't fall apart. They've learned that their emotional stability doesn't depend on any man's presence or behavior. The end of excuses. Senior women who have lived alone long enough stop making excuses for men's bad behavior. They've done their own emotional work. They've examined their own patterns. They've taken responsibility for their own lives, and they expect the same from men. They see clearly when a man is making excuses rather than taking responsibility. They recognize when someone is blaming circumstances, other people, or bad luck for patterns that are actually the result of his own choices. These women are done accepting explanations that don't hold up under scrutiny. If a man says he's too busy to call but manages to be active on social media, they see the lie. If a man claims he wants a relationship but never makes time to see her, they recognize the inconsistency. If a man says he's ready for commitment but his actions show otherwise, they trust his actions and dismiss his words. This refusal to make excuses extends to their own behavior as well. They don't excuse their own tendency to ignore red flags by saying they were in love. They don't justify staying too long in bad relationships by claiming they were trying to make it work. They take responsibility for their choices while also refusing to take responsibility for men's choices. This balanced approach gives them clarity that younger women often lack. Understanding male psychology, years of experience combined with the objectivity that comes from living alone gives senior women a deep understanding of male psychology. They understand that men often pursue what retreats and lose interest in what pursues them. They recognize that men are often more comfortable with action than with emotion. They see that men frequently need to feel needed, but also need to feel respected. They understand that men often equate sex with connection, even when emotional intimacy is absent. This understanding doesn't make them manipulative. Instead, it makes them realistic. They don't expect men to operate like women with deeper voices. They don't try to change fundamental aspects of male psychology. Instead, they decide whether a particular man's way of operating is compatible with what they need. If it is, they proceed. If it isn't, they don't waste time trying to remake him into something he's not. They also understand the games that some men play, not because they want to play along, but because they want to opt out. They recognize breadcrumbing, where a man gives just enough attention to keep her interested, but never enough to build a real relationship. They spot future faking, where a man paints elaborate pictures of a future together that he has no intention of creating. They identify hot and cold behavior, where a man alternates between intense interest and distant unavailability to keep her off balance. The value of peace. Perhaps the most significant shift that happens when senior women live alone long enough is that they learn to value peace above everything else. They've created peaceful lives for themselves. Their homes are sanctuaries. Their routines are calming. Their friendships are supportive. Their time is their own. They see clearly that any man who enters their life must add to this peace, not disrupt it. This means they evaluate men through a lens that younger women rarely use. They don't ask if he's exciting or if he makes her feel alive. They ask if he's peaceful or if he creates chaos. They don't wonder if the relationship is passionate. They consider whether it's stable. They don't focus on the highs. They pay attention to the consistency. These women recognize that drama, chaos, and emotional roller coasters aren't signs of intense love. They're signs of dysfunction. They've lived long enough to know that the most profound connections are often the quietest ones. They see that real love feels like coming home, not like riding a roller coaster. They understand that peace is the foundation of sustainable happiness. Actions over words. Senior women who have lived alone extensively have learned to trust actions over words completely. They've heard enough promises that were never kept, enough declarations of love that weren't backed by behavior, and enough explanations that didn't match reality. They no longer listen to what men say they'll do. They watch what men actually do. This shift in focus changes everything about how they evaluate men. A man who says he's interested but doesn't make plans to see her isn't interested, regardless of his words. A man who claims he's serious about her but doesn't integrate her into his life isn't serious despite his declarations. A man who promises to change but doesn't take concrete steps toward change isn't going to change, no matter how sincere he sounds. These women have learned that words are easy and actions are revealing. They pay attention to patterns of behavior over time rather than to isolated incidents or promises. They recognize that who a man is shown by what he does when no one is watching, when it's inconvenient, when it costs him something. They see clearly that a man who truly values her will show it consistently through his choices and priorities. Financial independence and clarity. For senior women who have lived alone and managed their own finances for years, financial independence creates a clarity about men that's impossible to achieve when you're financially dependent. These women don't need a man's financial support. They've built their own security. They've made their own investments. They've created their own stability. This changes how they see men fundamentally. They recognize immediately when a man is looking for financial security from her rather than offering it. They spot attempts to access her resources quickly. They see when someone is evaluating her worth based on what she can provide materially. They understand when a man is looking for a woman to support his lifestyle rather than a partner to build a life with. This financial independence also means they're not impressed by displays of wealth or generosity that are designed to create obligation. They see through the expensive dinner that comes with expectations. They recognize the lavish gift that's meant to purchase her gratitude or compliance. They understand that financial manipulation is still manipulation, whether it comes in the form of control or apparent generosity. The ability to walk away. Living alone successfully for years gives senior women something invaluable: the absolute certainty that they can walk away from any relationship at any time and be completely fine. This knowledge changes their entire relationship to men and dating. They're not staying because they're afraid to be alone. They're not tolerating bad behavior because they think they can't do better or won't find anyone else. They're not making compromises that compromise their well-being because they're desperate to make it work. This ability to walk away is visible to men, and it changes the dynamic completely. Men can sense when a woman is staying because she wants to versus when she's staying because she feels she has to. Senior women who have lived alone radiate an energy that says she's choosing to be there, but would be fine if she left. This isn't a game or a strategy. It's simply the truth, and it's powerful. These women have walked away from relationships before and survived. They've been alone and thrived. They know in their bones that being alone is vastly superior to being in a relationship that drains them, disrespects them, or makes them compromise who they are. This knowledge gives them a freedom that makes them see men and relationships with perfect clarity. No more settling. Senior women who have lived alone long enough stop settling. They've spent enough time with themselves to know exactly what they bring to a relationship. They've developed enough self-worth to understand their own value. They've achieved enough independence to recognize that they don't need to accept less than they deserve. These women see clearly what settling looks like, and they refuse to do it. They won't settle for someone who treats them as an option while they treat him as a priority. They won't settle for someone who's emotionally unavailable and expects her to be content with crumbs of affection. They won't settle for someone who's inconsistent, unreliable, or disrespectful. They won't settle for a relationship that requires them to shrink, suppress their needs, or pretend to be someone they're not. This refusal to settle isn't about having impossible standards. It's about having appropriate standards based on self-knowledge and self-respect. These women aren't looking for perfect men. They're looking for compatible men who treat them well, respect their boundaries, share their values, and contribute positively to their lives. And if such a man doesn't exist or doesn't appear, they're genuinely content to remain alone. Seeing through love bombing. One of the most valuable skills senior women who have lived alone develop is the ability to recognize love bombing immediately. Love bombing is when someone overwhelms you with attention, affection, compliments, and promises early in a relationship to create intense attachment quickly. It's a manipulation tactic that works on many women because it feels like intense connection and true love. But women who have lived alone long enough see through it instantly. They recognize that healthy relationships build gradually. They understand that real intimacy develops over time through shared experiences and proven trustworthiness. They see that someone who barely knows them cannot possibly love them as intensely as love bombing suggests. They recognize that overwhelming intensity in the beginning is often followed by sudden withdrawal, criticism, or abuse once the target is hooked. These women trust the discomfort they feel when someone comes on too strong. They recognize their own internal warning system. They see that a man who claims to have never felt this way before after knowing her for a week is either lying or has such poor boundaries that he's not relationship material. They understand that declarations of love, promises of forever, and talk of soulmates within days or weeks of meeting is a red flag, not a romantic sign. The myth of completion. Senior women who have lived alone successfully have shattered the myth that they need a man to complete them. They've discovered that they're already complete. They don't have a hole in their life that only a relationship can fill. They don't feel like they're missing something fundamental without a partner. They've built full, rich lives that are satisfying on their own. This realization changes how they see men entirely. They see men as potential additions to an already good life, rather than as solutions to a problematic life. They evaluate whether a particular man would enhance what they've already created, rather than whether he would finally make them happy. They recognize that happiness comes from within, from their own choices and mindset, not from external sources, including romantic partners. These women see clearly that the idea that you need another person to be complete is a harmful myth that keeps women settling for less than they deserve. They understand that two whole people can choose to build something together, but half a person looking for someone to complete them will only create dysfunction and disappointment. Red flags are deal breakers. When senior women have lived alone long enough, red flags stop being things to ignore, minimize, or explain away. Red flags become immediate deal breakers. These women have learned through painful experience that red flags in the beginning don't get better. They get worse. The controlling behavior that seems like caring in month 1 becomes isolation in month 6. The jealousy that seems like passion early on becomes accusations and restrictions later. The occasional outburst that seems understandable at first becomes a pattern of verbal abuse. These women trust their instincts. When something feels off, they pay attention. When a man displays behavior that concerns them, they take it seriously. When someone crosses a boundary, they address it immediately and watch the response carefully. They know that how a man responds to a boundary being set tells them everything they need to know about whether he's capable of being in a healthy relationship. They've learned to see red flags for what they are: information about a person's character, emotional health, and relationship patterns. They don't waste time trying to fix men or hoping men will change. They see the red flags, thank the universe for showing them clearly who this person is, and exit quickly before investing more time and emotion. Quality over quantity. Living alone teaches senior women to value quality over quantity in every area of life, including relationships. They're not interested in dating multiple men or having a roster. They're not measuring their worth by how much male attention they receive. They're not trying to keep options open. Instead, they're looking for one man who genuinely fits their life, shares their values, and treats them well. This focus on quality means they're extremely selective. They'd rather be alone than waste time with someone who's not a good match. They don't date just to date or to avoid being alone. They date with intention, looking for specific qualities that they know are important for long-term compatibility. They're not swayed by superficial qualities like looks, wealth, or charm. They pay attention to character, consistency, and compatibility. These women see clearly that one high-quality relationship is infinitely better than numerous mediocre ones. They recognize that their time and energy are valuable and limited. They understand that investing in the wrong person is costly, not just in terms of time, but in terms of emotional well-being and life satisfaction. They see that being selective isn't being picky, it's being smart. Emotional intelligence and observation. Years of living alone and reflecting on relationships gives senior women highly developed emotional intelligence. They can read emotions accurately, understand motivations, and predict behavior based on subtle cues. They notice micro-expressions that reveal true feelings. They pay attention to tone of voice, body, language, and energy. They recognize when someone's words and emotions don't match. This emotional intelligence gives them an almost uncanny ability to see through deception. They know when someone is lying not because they catch them in factual inconsistencies, but because they sense the emotional incongruence. They recognize when someone is hiding something or holding back. They see when someone is performing rather than being genuine. These women also understand their own emotions deeply. They know what triggers them and why. They recognize when they're reacting to the present situation or responding to past wounds. They can differentiate between intuition and fear, between self-protection and self-sabotage. This self-awareness combined with their ability to read others gives them remarkable clarity in evaluating men and relationships. The power of boundaries. Senior women who have lived alone have well-established boundaries that they've learned to set and maintain. They know what they will and won't accept. They understand what behaviors they find respectful and which ones they find disrespectful. They've learned to communicate their boundaries clearly and to enforce them consistently. These women see immediately when a man respects boundaries or when he pushes against them. They recognize that boundary pushing is a red flag that indicates someone who will not respect their autonomy, needs, or limits. They understand that a man who respects boundaries is a man who respects them. They see that someone who gets angry or manipulative when they set boundaries is showing them exactly who he is. They also recognize their own responsibility in maintaining boundaries. They don't set boundaries and then fail to enforce them. They don't communicate limits and then accept violations of those limits. They understand that boundaries only work if they're consistent, and they have the strength from living alone to maintain their boundaries even when it's difficult or disappointing. Seeing men as optional. Perhaps the most revolutionary shift that happens when senior women live alone long enough is that they genuinely see men as optional rather than necessary. This isn't something they tell themselves to feel better. It's something they know in their bones because they've lived it. They've proven to themselves that they can be happy, fulfilled, and satisfied without a man in their life. This shift is visible in everything about how they approach men and relationships. They're not anxious about being single. They're not worried about ending up alone. They're not making compromises to avoid being by themselves. They're genuinely content with their solo life and only interested in a relationship if it enhances what they already have. Men can sense this energy, and it's powerful. These women aren't needy, desperate, or anxious. They're confident, content, and selective. They radiate an energy that says they're complete on their own. They don't need a man's attention to feel worthy. They don't need a relationship to feel fulfilled. They don't need external validation to know their value. Understanding the difference between alone and lonely. Senior women who have lived alone successfully understand the profound difference between being alone and being lonely. They've discovered that you can be alone without being lonely, and perhaps more importantly, you can be in a relationship and be profoundly lonely. They see that loneliness is about emotional connection and feeling understood, not about physical presence. This understanding changes how they evaluate relationships. They're not looking for someone to keep them company or fill their time. They have full lives already. They're looking for someone who genuinely connects with them emotionally, who understands them, who sees them. They recognize that surface-level companionship isn't worth the compromises that relationships require. These women have learned to enjoy solitude. They've developed rich internal lives. They've learned to be comfortable with themselves. They've discovered that spending time alone can be restorative, creative, and deeply satisfying. This comfort with solitude means they're never staying in relationships out of fear of being alone, because being alone isn't frightening to them anymore. Not falling for potential. One of the hardest lessons that senior women who have lived alone have learned is to stop falling for potential. They've wasted enough time dating men for who they could be rather than for who they actually are. They've invested enough energy trying to help men become better versions of themselves. They've been disappointed enough times when potential remained perpetually in the future and never manifested in reality. These women now see men as they are, not as they might be. They evaluate current behavior, not future promises. They pay attention to what a man is doing now, not what he says he'll do eventually. They recognize that potential is irrelevant if someone isn't actively working to realize it. They understand that they're not rehabilitation centers for broken men or training grounds for men who haven't figured themselves out yet. They see clearly that a man in his 60s or 70s is who he is. His patterns are established. His character is formed. His habits are ingrained. He might grow or change in small ways, but fundamental transformation is unlikely. These women accept this reality rather than fighting against it. They choose men based on who they are right now, and if who they are right now isn't good enough, these women move on. Recognizing vulnerability as strength. Living alone successfully has taught senior women that vulnerability is strength, not weakness. They've learned to be vulnerable with themselves, acknowledging their needs, fears, and desires honestly. They've discovered that this self-honesty is the foundation of authentic living. They see that pretending to be someone you're not or hiding your true self is exhausting and ultimately unfulfilling. This understanding extends to how they see vulnerability in men. They recognize that a man who can be genuinely vulnerable is a man who has done his own emotional work. They value emotional availability and authentic expression over stoicism and emotional distance. They see that a man who can acknowledge his feelings, admit when he's wrong, and express his needs is a man capable of real intimacy. However, they also distinguish between appropriate vulnerability and emotional dumping. They recognize when someone is being genuine versus when someone is using vulnerability as a manipulation tactic to create premature intimacy or to make her feel responsible for his emotional well-being. They see that healthy vulnerability is reciprocal, boundaried, and appropriate to the stage of the relationship. The end of sacrificing for love. Senior women who have lived alone long enough have stopped sacrificing themselves for love. They've done that before. They've given up dreams, changed plans, moved cities, adjusted careers, and compromised their values for relationships. They've learned that sacrificing yourself for someone else doesn't create a healthy relationship. It creates resentment, imbalance, and eventual breakdown. These women see clearly that real love doesn't require sacrifice. It requires compromise, yes, but compromise is mutual and balanced. Sacrifice is one-sided and depleting. They recognize when they're being asked to sacrifice rather than compromise. They see when a man expects her to adjust her life to fit his, but isn't willing to adjust his life to accommodate hers. They've learned that a relationship should add to their life, not require them to give up essential parts of themselves. They understand that giving up who you are for someone else means you'll eventually resent them, and they'll be in a relationship with someone who isn't even really you. They see that authentic love can only exist between two people who are authentically themselves. Understanding their own power. Perhaps the most significant realization that comes to senior women who have lived alone is understanding their own power. They've discovered that they're far more capable, resilient, and strong than they ever imagined. They've handled crises alone. They've made difficult decisions alone. They've overcome obstacles alone. They've created good lives alone. This proves to them that their power comes from within, not from a relationship or a man. This understanding of their own power changes everything about how they see men. They're not looking to men for power, protection, or provision. They've provided for themselves. They've protected themselves. They've empowered themselves. They see men as potential partners in continuing to build the good life they've already created, not as sources of power they lack. These women recognize their power to choose. They understand their power to set standards and maintain them. They see their power to walk away from what doesn't serve them. They know their power to create the life they want with or without a partner. This power isn't aggressive or domineering. It's quiet, confident, and absolutely unshakable. The clarity of self-knowledge. Living alone for years gives senior women deep self-knowledge. They know what they like and what they don't like. They understand their own patterns, triggers, and tendencies. They recognize their strengths and accept their limitations. They know what makes them happy and what depletes them. This self-knowledge is invaluable when evaluating potential partners. These women can articulate clearly what they need in a relationship because they know themselves so well. They're not discovering their needs through relationships or expecting men to figure out what they need. They know what they need and can communicate it directly. They can identify quickly whether a particular man can meet their needs or not. They don't waste time hoping someone will change or trying to make an incompatible match work. This self-knowledge also means they recognize when they're falling into old patterns. They can catch themselves when they're about to make excuses for bad behavior or ignore red flags. They understand their own vulnerability to certain types of men or situations, and they can protect themselves proactively rather than reactively. They see clearly when something is their issue to work on versus when something is legitimately problematic about a man or situation. Recognizing authentic connection. Senior women who have lived alone extensively have experienced enough relationships to recognize what authentic connection feels like. They distinguish between chemistry and compatibility, between attraction and actual alignment, between exciting and sustainable. They see that true connection isn't about intensity or drama. It's about comfort, understanding, and genuine care. These women recognize authentic connection by how it feels in their bodies and their lives. Real connection feels peaceful rather than anxious. It feels grounding rather than destabilizing. It creates energy rather than draining it. It makes life better rather than complicating it. They trust these felt senses because they've learned to trust themselves. They also recognize what authentic connection requires: honesty, vulnerability, consistency, and mutual effort. They see when someone is showing up authentically versus when someone is performing. They distinguish between a man who is genuinely interested in knowing her versus one who is interested in the idea of her or what she can provide. They recognize superficial connection instantly and don't mistake it for something deeper. The freedom of not caring what others think. Living alone successfully has freed senior women from caring excessively about what others think. They've learned that other people's opinions about their choices don't matter nearly as much as they once thought. They've discovered that living according to others' expectations is exhausting and ultimately unsatisfying. They've embraced the freedom that comes with making choices based on their own values and desires rather than on social pressure or expectations. This freedom extends to their relationship status. They're not ashamed of being single. They don't feel they need to explain or justify why they're not in a relationship. They're not trying to find a man to prove anything to anyone. They see that being partnered isn't inherently better than being single, just different. They recognize that the right relationship enhances life, but no relationship is better than a wrong relationship. These women also don't care what men think about their standards, boundaries, or choices. They're not adjusting their behavior to be more appealing to men. They're not pretending to be less intelligent, capable, or successful. to make men feel more comfortable. They're not playing games or following dating rules designed to manipulate men into commitment. They're being authentically themselves and trusting that the right man will appreciate them as they are. Seeing consistency as the ultimate indicator, senior women who have lived alone have learned that consistency is the most important indicator of someone's character and intentions. Words are easy. Anyone can say anything. But consistent behavior over time reveals who someone truly is. These women pay attention to patterns rather than isolated incidents. They watch what someone does repeatedly rather than focusing on occasional exceptions. They see that a man who is consistently kind, respectful, honest, and reliable is far more valuable than a man who is occasionally spectacular but frequently disappointing. They recognize that grand gestures mean nothing if they're not backed up by daily consideration. They understand that promises about the future are meaningless if they're not reflected in present behavior. This focus on consistency also means they give relationships time to reveal themselves. They're not rushing into commitment or assuming that early behavior will continue. They understand that people often show their best selves early in relationships, and that true character emerges over time and under stress. They watch how men behave when things are difficult, when they're tired, when they're frustrated. They pay attention to how men treat others, not just how they treat them. Understanding that words without action are manipulation. One of the clearest insights senior women who have lived alone develop is understanding that words without corresponding action are a form of manipulation. They've heard enough empty promises, enough declarations that weren't backed up, enough explanations that justified bad behavior. They know that words are tools that can be used to create false impressions and control behavior. These women recognize that when someone consistently says one thing but does another, they're being manipulated. A man who says he values her but doesn't make time for her doesn't value her, regardless of his words. A man who claims he wants a relationship but doesn't move toward commitment isn't ready for a relationship, despite what he says. A man who promises to change but doesn't take concrete steps toward change has no intention of changing, no matter how sincere he sounds. They trust actions over words completely. They evaluate men based on what they do, not on what they say they'll do. They recognize that excuses are just words used to justify behavior that doesn't match stated intentions. They see that explanations that don't result in changed behavior are just manipulation designed to buy more time or patience. They understand that in healthy relationships, words and actions align naturally and consistently. The wisdom of solitude, living alone for years, has given senior women access to a wisdom that's difficult to achieve any other way. Solitude provides space for deep reflection, self-examination, and insight. These women have spent time thinking about their lives, their choices, their patterns. They've had the space to process their experiences and extract lessons from them. They've developed a philosophical approach to life that comes from having time to think deeply. This wisdom manifests in how they see men and relationships. They have perspective that younger women often lack. They understand that most problems that seem enormous in the moment are actually quite small in the scope of a life. They see that relationships are important, but not everything. They recognize that being happy alone is a prerequisite for being happy with someone else. They've also developed wisdom about themselves. They know their own darkness as well as their light. They've accepted their own flaws while continuing to work on them. They've forgiven themselves for past mistakes while learning from them. This self-acceptance and self-knowledge allows them to see others clearly because they're not projecting their own unresolved issues onto men or relationships. Recognizing that they don't need fixing, senior women who have lived alone successfully have realized that they don't need fixing. They're not broken, they're not incomplete, they're not deficient. They might have room for growth, like all humans do, but they're fundamentally whole and worthy as they are. This realization is profoundly powerful because it changes what they look for in relationships. These women aren't looking for someone to fix them, save them, or complete them. They're looking for someone to appreciate them, enjoy them, and build with them. They see that any man who approaches them as a project or a problem to solve is revealing his own issues, not addressing theirs. They recognize that the right man will see them as they are and value them as they are, not as potential to be realized. This also means they're not looking to fix men. They've learned that you can't fix anyone else. People only change when they're internally motivated to do so. Trying to fix someone else is a waste of energy that creates resentment on both sides. They see men as they are and decide whether who they are is someone they want to build a relationship with. If not, they move on without trying to change them. The gift of time. Living alone has taught senior women the value of time. They understand that time is limited and precious. They've lived enough years to see how quickly time passes and how little of it is truly available. This understanding makes them protective of their time and selective about how they spend it. They see that every hour invested in the wrong person or relationship is an hour they'll never get back. These women don't waste time on men who aren't showing clear interest and consistent effort. They don't invest energy in situations that aren't progressing. They don't stay in relationships hoping things will improve when there's no evidence of positive change. They value their time too much to spend it on people or situations that aren't working. This respect for time also means they move at their own pace in relationships. They're not rushed by someone else's timeline or pressure. They take the time they need to evaluate whether someone is a good fit. They allow relationships to develop naturally rather than forcing them forward prematurely. They understand that real connection takes time to build, and that rushing often leads to mistakes. Understanding that love isn't enough. Perhaps one of the most important insights senior women who have lived alone develop is understanding that love alone isn't enough to make a relationship work. They've loved men who were wrong for them. They've been in relationships with men they loved deeply that still failed. They've learned that love without compatibility, shared values, mutual respect, and consistent effort isn't sustainable. These women see clearly that relationships require much more than love. They need alignment on important issues like finances, family, lifestyle, and future goals. They require both people being in similar places emotionally and in life stages. They demand consistent communication, compromise, and commitment. They need respect, trust, and genuine friendship as a foundation. This understanding protects them from staying in relationships that feel good emotionally but don't work practically. They see that loving someone who can't meet their needs or who wants a different kind of life isn't enough to build a sustainable partnership. They recognize that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is acknowledge that love alone isn't sufficient and let go. The power of choice. Living alone for years has given senior women an absolute understanding of their power to choose. They've made countless choices in building their solo lives. They've seen the results of good choices and learned from the consequences of poor ones. They understand that their life is the sum of their choices, and they take this responsibility seriously. This understanding of choice extends to relationships. They see clearly that staying in a relationship is a choice they make every day. They're not trapped by circumstance, fear, or lack of options. They're choosing to stay because the relationship adds value to their life. And the moment it stops adding value or starts detracting from their well-being, they know they can choose differently. These women also respect men's choices. They don't try to convince someone to want them or to change their mind about the relationship. If a man chooses to leave, they respect that choice and let him go. They understand that wanting someone who doesn't want them back is a recipe for suffering. They see that trying to control someone else's choices is futile and disrespectful. They focus on their own choices and trust that the right person will make choices that align with building a relationship together. We've covered an enormous amount of ground in this video, exploring the profound transformation that happens in how senior women see men after living alone for an extended period. This isn't about becoming bitter or closed off. It's about developing crystal clear vision that comes from independence, experience, and deep self-knowledge. These women have learned to see through games, recognize patterns, trust their instincts, and value their peace above everything else. The clarity that comes from living alone successfully is a gift. It protects these women from wasting time on wrong relationships. It guides them toward connections that genuinely enhance their lives. It allows them to appreciate good men when they appear, while quickly identifying and avoiding problematic ones. Most importantly, it gives them the confidence to know that they're absolutely fine, whether a relationship materializes or not. If you're a senior woman who has lived alone, I hope this video validated your experience and reminded you of the wisdom you've gained. If you're contemplating living alone or are earlier in this journey, I hope this gave you something to look forward to. The clarity, peace, and self-knowledge that come from successfully living alone are worth every challenge along the way. You learn to see not just men, but yourself and life with remarkable clarity. You discover strengths you didn't know you had. You develop standards you're committed to maintaining. You create a life that's so fulfilling that you'll only share it with someone truly exceptional. Remember, being selective isn't being picky. Having standards isn't being difficult. Refusing to settle isn't being unrealistic. These are all signs of self-respect, self-knowledge, and wisdom. You've earned the right to be selective through your experiences, your growth, and your willingness to live authentically. Never apologize for knowing what you deserve and refusing to accept less. The right person will appreciate your clarity, respect your boundaries, and add to the beautiful life you've already created. Before we close, I want to remind you of a few things. If this video resonated with you, please hit that like button. It truly helps this content reach more women who need to hear these messages. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences with how living alone has changed your perspective. Your wisdom contributes to a community of strong, clear-sighted women supporting each other. Share this video with other women in your life who might benefit from this message. We're building a community based on truth, empowerment, and mutual support. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now and turn on notifications. We regularly post content designed to empower you, educate you, and remind you of your worth. Every video is crafted with care to provide real value and genuine insight. And for those who want to take their support a step further, consider leaving a super thanks. Your financial support directly enables us to continue creating this content, researching these topics deeply, and serving this community. Every contribution, no matter the size, makes a real difference in our ability to keep bringing you these important conversations. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for doing the work to see clearly and live authentically. Until next time, remember that your clarity is your power, your standards are your protection, and your peace is your priority. Take care of yourself, trust yourself, and never settle for less than you deserve. I'll see you in the next video.